But on October 1st, 1997, Jeff went for a ride with a neighbor, Salvatore SICARI, and his friend Charles JAYNES, seen here. The two men promised to buy him a new bike to replace his bike, which had been stolen a few weeks before. He never returned.
This is the true crime story of 10-year-old Jeffrey Curley, who would die a brutal death at the hands of a necrophilic fowl. The man was a member of NAMBLA, the North American Man-Boy Love Association. As you can already tell, viewer discretion is advised on this case, as it is a rough one to get through. Hello, my name is Holly. Welcome to the Murder She Shed. You're always invited here weekly to hear rarely told true crime right from my she shed. But you can't come back and you can't find me in this big YouTube world if you don't hit that subscribe button. Come on, help a Southern girl out. Anyway, let's get right on with this case. Oh God, if this wasp don't murder me first. I know I said it was a murder she shed, but that gives you no right to come in here and try to murder me. Stay up there in the loft. I have an upstairs. I hope he stays up there. Yes, me and my husband built this she shed ourselves, and I have had so much enjoyment out of it. Anyway, that's beside the fact. Let's get right on to this case. Jeffrey Curley grew up in Inman Square, Massachusetts. He had two older brothers, and his parents, Bob and Barbara Curley, had just recently divorced. He lived with his mother and very much was a mama's boy. Jeffrey could often be seen riding his old bike through the neighborhood. Jeffrey thrived on a whirlwind of activities. He was a very energetic little boy. His mom often couldn't keep up with him. He was so energetic. Jeffrey could often be seen in the neighborhood just helping his fellow humans out. He'd hitch a ride on the city garbage truck and pocket a couple of dollars for his trash collecting efforts. He'd help a Cambodian bicycle mechanic on the next street over, shovel ice shavings from the local rink during hockey games, make flavored ice at the corner grocery in exchange for a sandwich and a soda. He loved baseball and ice skating. He enjoyed life and meeting new people. One of those people he would eventually meet would end his life. Charles JAYNES had changed his name after eluding 75 arrest warrants for an impressive string of bad checks. When Charles was in high school, he wasn't ashamed to tell people that he was attracted to young boys as young as 6. As an adult, Charles could be seen having child image material inside of his apartment. He was a proud card holder of NAMBLA. A half dozen NAMBLA bulletins had been placed by his bed. Writings about pedophilia also was scattered throughout the apartment. One book was titled Loving Boys. Another, his hardcover diary, contained a meticulously written record of Charles' experiences and fantasies, including memories of his first intimate encounter with another boy when both were just 11 years old. He also recorded that he once paid a boy $120 for favors. In the diary, Charles wrote that he did not begin to understand his desires until 1996 when he read a NAMBLA bulletin. The organization, Charles said, helped me to become aware of my own sexuality and acceptance of it. His best friend and lover was Salvatore SICARI. Sal was an unemployed 21-year-old misfit that Charles had met in 1996 through introductions from his girlfriend. Sal had an extensive criminal history and didn't work. He made his money by scamming and ripping people off. Sal was well known by Jeffrey, who often rode his bicycle past Sal's apartment. As the summer of 1997 crept into August, Jeffrey began seeing a new visitor to the neighborhood. And that visitor, Charles JAYNES, soon made Jeffrey feel like he had a new buddy. One with a big car, surprise gifts, and hours of available attention. Unfortunately for Jeffrey, this man was setting him up to be fully groomed. He was giving him whatever he wanted. But Jeffrey, his innocence, he did not know. He just thought, I made a new friend that's really good to me. And he felt at a great time because Jeffrey's best friend, who was a cousin, had moved 40 miles away that year. So he was kind of lonely. Jeffrey would even ride around in Charles' Cadillac. He never mentioned to his mother the rides he took in Charles' vehicle because he knew she would not allow such a thing. Other outings with Charles would not be mentioned either, such as the trip to a shopping mall where Charles posed in a photo booth with little Jeffrey on his lap. For a month, Charles had promised Jeffrey a new bike. His old bike had actually gotten stolen, and in fact, he had lost several bikes that way. He didn't put them up. His mom always told him, you don't put them up, that's what happens. People will steal them. And his last bike he just lost that way. And she said, I cannot afford to buy you a new bike until Christmas. But Jeffrey, new friend, Charles, stepped forward and said, I'll buy you a new bike. So on October 1st, 1997, Jeffrey hopped in the back of Charles' Cadillac to go get his bike. Charles told Jeffrey that he expected something in return. But Jeffrey was so excited about the potential of a new bike, he didn't really care about the payback. Sal was going along since they told Jeffrey that it was a friend of Sal's that they were getting this bike from. When Charles stopped to put gas in his vehicle, he doused a cloth with fuel. After he left the mobile station, Charles drove the car toward the rear of a small shopping center across the intersection. Charles, who needed to urinate, was joined by Sal and Jeffrey as they relieved themselves before supposedly continuing this trip. Here, Jeffrey was just one of the guys, reveling in a midday adventure with his new best friends. Charles and Jeffrey finished their business first, returning to the car in a misty rain as Sal lingered in the alley. In Jeffrey's mind, a good day was about to get better. In addition to the bicycle, Charles had said Jeffrey now stood to make $50 whole. Finally, Jeffrey would hear what Charles expected in return. The price of his generosity, Charles explained, was a sexual favor. Jeffrey, horrified, refused a demand he could barely understand. Meanwhile, Barbara Jeffrey's mom had just finished putting dinner on the table, and she was getting upset with Jeffrey for being so late for dinner. Barbara put on her jacket and started walking to all the places she knew Jeffrey would hang out. She returned home at 7:30 p.m. to find no sign of Jeffrey. Over and over for 45 minutes, Barbara dialed 24 homes where Jeffrey might have been that day or where he might have been still playing. And over, the drumbeat of disappointing answers perplexed and worried her. She then called Jeffrey's brothers, who were actually at a party, and they began the search for their brother. The family didn't know that Jeffrey was in the car with two grown men, now breathing his last breath. Charles had become extremely angry when Jeffrey refused his advances. Charles reacted with a burst of volcanic fury, grabbing Jeffrey with single-minded force and dragging him to the back seat of the car. Sal turned just in time to see Jeffrey disappear into the back of the Cadillac. Stunned, he bolted toward the car, racing around the vehicle and slamming all the doors. He threw himself into the driver's seat, looked around, and then punched the gas and sped out of the parking lot. Behind him, a violent battle had begun. Jeffrey was fighting for his life, flailing against a 300-pound predator who had just set on him to pin him to the seat. Still struggling to subdue the boy, Charles reached for the rag and held the fuel-drenched cloth to Jeffrey's face, pressing harder and harder, smothering the boy's nose and mouth and forcing him to inhale the toxic vapors. "Don't fight it," Charles yelled. "Don't fight it." Instead, Jeffrey lashed out with his arms and legs again and again in a furious effort to fight off the killer he had thought was his friend. Unable to see, he strained to find and release the door handle, his short fingers jabbing for the lever under Charles' crushing weight. Despite his size, Jeffrey refused to succumb. By now, the gasoline had reached his brain, his blood, and his lungs, searing Jeffrey's respiratory tract and raising raw, painful blisters on his face and neck. Amazingly, Jeffrey continued to paddle as the Cadillac mingled with afternoon traffic. At one point, in a final futile signal for help, the boy's arm shot straight up. Frightened and angered by Jeffrey's resistance, Charles grabbed his arm and just slammed it back down. The struggle continued for about 20 minutes as Sal, his eyes darting between the rearview mirror and the rush hour congestion, nervously steered the Cadillac on an aimless path to no set destination. By now, Jeffrey's long, desperate struggle had ended, and he lay dead, the frantic fight for life too great for his 77 pounds. His blue eyes stared blankly toward the roof as his small body lay prone on the back seat of a car that reeked of gasoline. Bruises marred his gums, arms, knees, and buttocks. And on Jeffrey's upper left shoulder and arm, the diamond-shaped weave of his football jersey lay imprinted on his skin like a cattle brand. Charles panted while lines of sweat poured down his face. He gasped for breath, but seemed oblivious to his deed. Charles then got in the front seat to drive and made Sal get in the back with Jeffrey's deceased body. They went to 2 different hardware stores where they bought a tarp, lime, and cement. They then drove to a department store where they bought a Rubbermaid tote. The price for the tote was $39.99, and Charles said, "I guess I'll spend $40 on the kid." They drove back to Charles' apartment, where Charles undressed little Jeffrey and decided to keep his jersey as a souvenir. Then, with Jeffrey's naked body before him, he prepared to plumb the depths of his disturbing fantasy. If you want to skip ahead, I'll put a time you can skip to, and you don't have to hear this part of the story because it is the rough part of the story. Across the kitchen, Charles spotted a long-necked bottle of Coors Light beer. As Sal looked on, Charles lubricated the top of the empty bottle with petroleum jelly, bent to the floor, and inserted it into Jeffrey's privates. Charles then essayed the boy and encouraged Sal to do the same, but he refused. Charles then commented to Sal, "I didn't know I would like having with a dead body." His perversions completed for the night, Charles prepared to dispose of the body. He and Sal stirred the cement using the pasty mix to align the bottom of the Rubbermaid container, and then inserted Jeffrey's body. They poured lime onto his body and duct taped the lid shut. They carried the box to the trunk of the car and noticed some girls actually leaving a bar across the road. Despite everything that had just happened, only minutes after placing Jeffrey's body in the trunk, Sal suggested they try their luck with these girls. The pair approached 2 girls, struck up a conversation, and persuaded them to visit the apartment. Sal made progress with one of them, a girl whose blood alcohol level might have actually masked the apartment's death smell. Charles, however, was a different animal, rudely arrogant and grossly overweight. He quickly offended the other girl, who made for the door quickly after getting there. Sal's would-be companion jumped up. "Let me see if I can talk to her," she said. The woman followed her friend into the hall, but Charles had just gone too far. She was done. But Charles said that was only a diversion, and they could not afford a distraction. After the girls left, he immediately redirected his attention to something he thought was more important, disposing of the container. They tossed the empty cement bags and the rest of Jeffrey's clothing in a dumpster as they were driving to dump his body. Eventually, they stopped about 50 yards north of the river, popped open the trunk from inside the car, and carried the container to the bridge where they each had each side of the container, and they just slung it into the river. Then they watched it as it began to float away. When they reached Sal's apartment at 9 a.m., Charles took a moment to consider the anguish that was building, minute by minute, at the Curley household a block away. "You should go over and knock," he said, on Barbara's door, "and ask her where Jeffrey is." Charles was savoring the cruelty. He just wanted to torture her. Next weekend, he said, "We'll kill Sean Curley, who was Jeffrey's brother, The weekend after that, we'll kill Bobby Curley, Jeffrey's other brother. And then we'll keep calling the mother, asking for her kids," Charles giggled. His goal, Charles told Sal, was to be a famous killer, just like Jeffrey Dahmer. And he was well on his way. In fact, younger victims, which makes him even more disturbing in a way. Meanwhile, Barbara had already filed a missing person report at the police station. Barbara then called Jeffrey's father to let him know Jeffrey was missing. Police began a door-to-door canvass of the area. The family made posters up and began handing them out and hanging them in the neighborhood. A friend of Bobby's in the neighborhood mentioned something really interesting. He said a guy named Charles JAYNES supposedly had offered Jeffrey a bicycle the previous week. Bobby knew where Sal lived, so he walked to his house. Sal only admitted to seeing Jeffrey walking his dog the evening before. Sal then started distributing flyers like everyone else, trying to disguise himself like he had done nothing wrong. Then he walked back to the Curley's house and told the mother, "I'm so sorry you can't find him," putting on an act for the whole family. But the father seen right through this act. He thought he was acting a bit suspicious. And he actually informed the police that, "I think there's something up with Sal. He just don't seem right." So the police came and talked to Sal and asked him what he knew. And he thought he better be the first to mention the bike and how his friend Charles had offered to buy Jeffrey one. Both Sal and Charles were brought in for a police interview, in which Charles immediately lawyered up. As Charles rose to return to the holding cell, he left police with a startling and mysterious statement. "I want to tell you something about Sal, but I want my attorney present. I could help you guys find Jeffrey." That cryptic comment would be the last communication between the police and Charles, whose attorney arrived shortly. Sal told police he would take a polygraph test. The polygraph indicated he was lying, but Sal was unaware of the results. Immediately after the exam, he told police that Charles was a pedophile and had wanted to give Jeffrey $50 in exchange for sex. He said he had not seen Jeffrey but knew something had happened to him. During a search of Charles' car at Newton Police Headquarters, officers discovered a receipt for concrete and lime, complete with the time of purchase from the Home Depot. They also found an additional receipt from another store for a Rubbermaid container. Police then viewed both of the store's surveillance tapes, which showed Sal and Charles together at the registers. Now they knew that Sal had been lying. When Sal was told about this discovery, he started to cry and said he would talk. And boy, did he ever. He told police every last detail. Sal even took police to where they had threw Jeffrey's body off that bridge into the water. Jeffrey's family was told their son was deceased and they were looking for his body. Jeffrey's body was found 4 days after he was reported missing. The sealed container was sitting upright on the river bottom, having traveled just 50 yards before lodging in the trunk of a fallen tree. Charles was given life with the possibility of parole. While in prison, Charles has said, "I did it to see if I could get away with it, like on TV." Another inmate said that Charles said to him that he wouldn't hesitate to do it again. "I would pull him out of the grave and do it again and again." How evil is that? Charles was just denied parole. Sal is serving life without the possibility of parole. It's crazy to me that Charles received a chance at parole while Sal did not, when Charles committed the actual murder. A Boston Library computer showed that Charles had actually logged onto the Nambula website just hours before the killing. Bob and his ex-wife Barbara Curley famously filed a $200 million suit against Nambula for wrongful death following their son's murder. In light of Charles' affiliation with that organization, they dropped the charges in 2008 after years of litigation. Nambula does still exist online. It works to abolish age of consent laws criminalizing adult involvement with minors and campaigns for the release of men who have been jailed for contacts with minors that did not involve what it considers coercion. Although NAMBLA used to have member meetings, the interactions are now done online, and members of the group have been in decline since the invention of the internet, because there are so many other ways that these monsters can meet and discuss their fantasies, or just discuss them online. I want to end this video by saying I'm so sorry to the Curley family that they had to lose their beautiful boy to such evil monsters. I can't even imagine the hell they've been through after Jeffrey's brutal death. I don't often discuss my essay by a neighbor when I was just 7 years old, but those that have watched my channel since the beginning have no doubt heard my story. Because of my history, this is why I so often discuss child cases. I know they're hard to discuss, and I know people don't often like to discuss this, and YouTube often demonetizes me for discussing this, but I feel like it still needs to be discussed. I think it helps us learn that we need to protect our children more, that there is such evil out there. I know that as an SA victim, carries through your whole life. It's something, no matter how much counseling you have, you still carry it. It still comes back, and it still hurts. So I can't imagine, as a parent myself, my boys are grown, but I can't imagine if it's bad enough it being me, but if it had been my boys. Not only that someone victimized them like that, but took their life. I can't imagine what I'd want to do to that person. It'd just be so painful. It would be something you could never get over. I'm just so disgusted by any individual who would groom and abuse a child in this way. My prayers go out to the Curley family, and may you rest in peace, Jeffrey John Curley. All right, guys, this was a rough one, but when it comes to children, it's always rough cases. It's hard to get through them. Anyway, I do love you guys, and I hope to see y'all again at the Murder She Shed. Make sure you hit that subscribe button, and I will let you say goodbye to my boys. I'm not sure where Simon went, but Max is laying right here asleep. And people ask me, why is Simon the main one in your video? I actually have 3 dogs. I have Buddy, Max, and Simon. And Simon actually is the one that follows me the most. Max is actually my husband's dog, and he's usually in the garage with my husband a lot of times. Buddy's old, and he just stays in the air conditioning house, and I don't blame him. Come here, Max. You want to tell him bye? This is Max. He's my lab, or my husband's lab, but we both claim him. He's like 120 pounds of just pure love. And here's Simon, who's trying to come on this other. Oh, he's trying to get in the front. He likes lots of attention. And if you're here often, you see Simon a lot. Simon, sit. Sit. Thank you. All right. What do you want to do? That was not. Sit, or we're not going to do nothing. Sit. Look at your brother. He's minding over there. You're just stubborn as the day is long. Okay.